If you have an unquenchable thirst to crush your bucket list, relentlessly pursue your dreams, and live life on your own terms, then turn up the volume and tune in. You're now listening to Zeph Moses Blacksburg on the Year of Purpose podcast.
This episode of the Year of Purpose is brought to you by our brand new book, Life Rescripted. Find your purpose and design your dream life before the curtains close. If you want to be the first in line to receive a free digital copy from me, all you have to do is head on over to www.liferescriptedbook.com to find out more. Zeph Blacksburg here with another episode of the Year of Purpose podcast, and today I'm joined by Beverley Golden. Beverley is a writer, raconteur, peacenik, and self-professed guinea pig who loves testing unconventional ways to shift paradigms in the playing fields of healthcare, storytelling, and creativity as a path to world peace. She courageously uncovers the humor in life's crazy situations, offering hope while promoting inner wisdom through the written word. Trust your intuition, even when no one else sees your point of view, is her signature mantra. Her best-selling book, Confessions of a Middle-Aged Hippie, bursts with anecdotes from her years in the entertainment industry, coupled with her stories of survival from a life lived with health issues. Her passion is turning the impossible into the possible, and she shares her thought-provoking observations on the Huffington Post, among others, and today she's hanging out with me. Beverley, how's it going?
Pretty great. I'm really happy to be here. I mean, I love your energy. I love what you're doing, and I think this is could be an interesting mixing or meeting of two, we'll say, different places in time, but having the same view of how to live life and to really make each day, each year, like kind of the best one yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very cool to get differing perspectives, especially from the different generations. And so that's one of the big things I really do like about this is being so young, I get to see all the different points of view. And you know, you grew up in a totally different time period as I did. So I'd love to kind of dive right in, maybe share a little bit about your history and ultimately what's led you to write this book that you just released.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like if from the inside out, it's kind of a different situation because I had health issues from a fairly young age and undiagnosable health issues. And at times people would say it's going to be impossible to heal. And I was always a writer. Like I like to say, I arrived on the planet this time as a writer. There was just something in me that always wanted to express things through words, reading at an early age, and really fascinated with stories, like people's stories, which I still am. So about 13 years ago now, I had probably my lowest health in my entire life, and the prognosis wasn't very good. I was told a lot of things would be impossible. So that's where that idea of I don't like the word impossible because I don't think really anything is impossible. I think there's always another way. So with my health, I did something rather unconventional. I flew off to Germany when I barely could walk up a flight of stairs. And again, the prognosis was, I mean, I think you should pray was really what they said to me. That was what they had to tell me. It's like, you know, this is very, very complicated. You'll probably never travel again. And knowing what just came to me is knowing how much, you know, you are passionate about traveling. That was not something I wanted to hear, that it would be impossible for me to ever travel again. So I kind of started traveling again, my own path. This had been my thing throughout my life. As someone would say to me, well, that's really not going to be possible. I would set out and see what is possible. You know, how can somebody predict my future or my life because of a set of scientific statistics, in this case to do with my health? So the book was born, I guess, out of a moment in my life where I was really at a very, very low point. And I just started writing these anecdotal stories. They were more memories of different periods in my life. And I'd spent a lot of time in the music industry. So I'd had some pretty, I don't know if you'd say wild, but interesting adventures. They might have been wild to some people, but they were just interesting adventures in the music industry and this desire to make it, you know, in the music industry and rubbing shoulders with a lot of fairly well-known people. And my former husband had been in the music industry as well. So it was kind of these collections of stories where they intertwined my health issues with the music industry or the entertainment industry. And I don't find linear time very exciting, to be honest with you. So I wrote the book in a rather, it kind of came out in an unorthodox way. It was just these memories that came out, and they were self-contained memories that happened in specific periods of time. They could have happened in the 60s, or then jumped to the 90s, or then, back to the 80s. So they were just these interesting, maybe, stories of my life that I thought, I've survived some things that I was told I wouldn't. Perhaps there's something of interest to other people here. And I certainly don't have a prescription. It's not like, if you do this, this will be your result. Because what I've realized is we are all highly individual. And that's one of the things I love so much about people's stories. Everybody finds their own way, or, creates their own life based on what's interesting to them or what their challenges are in life. So the book was born out of that, and I think, channeled this title, Confessions of a Middle-Aged Hippie. And it was like, okay, well, that's a really interesting title. And as my brother pointed out to me not too long after I'd finished the book, he goes, Beverley, you weren't really a hippie. And I'm like, what do you mean I wasn't a hippie, right? Like, because when we think of hippie, I do think there's, the media has portrayed hippie as very much a lifestyle, where it was, sex and drugs and rock and roll, and that phrase kind of goes with hippie. So I had to do some pretty deep soul searching. I thought, how do I call my book Confessions of a Middle-Aged Hippie when I actually wasn't a hippie? And what I realized is I was a hippie, because what I was mentioning, I think, to you just briefly is, if you look at what was happening in the 60s, it was fairly revolutionary times, which I think we are living in again now. And during that time, so many of the things that are part of our popular cultural conversation now were born, and they were considered, like I said, revolutionary or counterculture. So if we look at the hippie movement, it was really about community. It was about organic living. It was the peace movement was born then. It was about love. It was about music and art. And it was about having compassion, and meditation was introduced. So when I talk to people about this, it was really more about the value system than the lifestyle. And the hippie values, what I realize, are at the core of who we all are as human beings. So I can talk to someone as young as you. I can talk to people who were in their 20s and their 30s. And when I talk about hippie values, people inevitably go, wow, I'm actually a hippie at the core of because people realize this is a value system that's a human value system. So then I thought, great, I am a hippie, so it's okay. It's okay to call my book that. So the book was born out of just these stories. And I think people love creating stories, about their experiences and about their life. And I'm sure, having traveled a lot, you have some amazing stories and memories that will live with you forever. And it was just sharing these stories in a rather unusual way. First of all, not only non-linear, but I did it as an interview. So as if I was talking to this very famous talk show host, and we were just sitting having a conversation, because that's my thing. It's having conversations with people. So it's told in an interview style. And I've since been told that no one has ever written a book like mine in my genre that way. And what people love about it is they feel they're part of the conversation. And they want to know the answers to the questions that the talk show host is asking me, which are really my stories about everything and anything from the music industry. My daughter also was in the entertainment industry, so we got to travel a lot. So it's really these life stories, and that's what I think is most fascinating about human beings, is we have these incredible stories to share with each other, and through those stories, hopefully people have some resonance, or maybe take away a little tidbit that will influence them in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And much like you were saying with this hippie culture, a lot of this stuff is making a resurgence. Meditation is making a huge comeback. Mindfulness, yoga, eating super healthy. And I think they're just calling them hipsters now. I think that it hasn't really. I think it's making a huge comeback. I think that it was a great mindset and a great frame of reference for life and how you should approach things. So part of my question to you would be, why do you think it kind of went away in the late 80s, early 90s, and then what is it that's making it come back so easily?
Well, and there's I was writing an article about the astrology behind the time, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, but there certainly is an astrological support for the 60s, then being mirrored again now, and then this will carry through for the next 50 years. So we're kind of at this middle point where things that were considered revolutionary then are now they're not fully accepted, but they certainly are part of the conversation. Like you said, everywhere you go, people talk about meditation. I mean, back then it was it wasn't necessarily well accepted. And then you had the Beatles, right, who went to India and brought it back over to North America and to England. So it is interesting, but I don't know if it went away. So that was the big question. What happened to the hippies? That was a big question I was looking for. And then people said, well, they became environmental lawyers, right? Or they became people who were at the forefront of the peace movement. So if you really look, they're still there. They just kind of maybe spread out.
Okay.
Does that make sense? They spread out. And it was funny. Somebody just sent me an article recently, the 10 places in the US that you'll find hippie, like that hippies live. I don't know, not if they're hippie culture, but it was interesting to see. So there's like places in Oregon or places in Arizona or in California or in New York. So there's still people who are living both the lifestyle, and I think we're all living the value system. So did it go away? I don't know, because you're in the generation, like, and my daughter's in the generation, and, you know, I would say that the hippies, with the quotes around it, who grew up in the 60s, have kind of passed that on in their own ways, right? So here I am saying I wasn't officially a hippie because I wasn't that kind of hippie, the lifestyle, but I was the value person. So that's what I've infused in my life. And that's what, you know, it's funny because somebody who knows me and she's in her early 30s, she goes, of course you're a hippie. What do you mean? I would never not think you're a hippie. So it's interesting how people look at other people. And she said, of course you are, because you live that. You're totally the peace person. You know, I have the word peace in my license plate on my car. Or, you know what I mean? Just stuff like that, where you're really spreading it, not necessarily in a counterculture way or where it's not being accepted. Or, you know, I'm sure you've read enough about what was going on in the 60s and how it was not a very accepted lifestyle, we'll say. And hippies were considered whatever they were considered and whatever the media wanted to portray them as. But if you look at, like I said, these values, the peace movement, you know, people still say I'm quite naive. And of course, the rose-colored glasses are my little emblem, because I love to look at the world through rose-colored glasses. It looks amazing. And it's this idea of spreading the value system. And I'm sure you embody them too. You know, do you love music? Do you love art? Are you a compassionate person? Do you care about other people? That's the main thing. It was really basically about community. And I see that happening so much more now. I mean, the online world really does create virtual communities and this opportunity for you and for me when we're traveling to immerse ourselves in other people's communities and other people's cultures. So it's interesting. I don't know if it went away. I guess I've always thought it was just with me because that's who I am.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Part of what you said there, something kind of clicked for me, was that, you know, everyone's looking for their tribe and their community, right? And so I think that when technology came out, it was a bit of a double-edged sword because we all started to separate ourselves. It was so much easier to, you know, break up with someone over a text than, you know, face to face. And, but at the same time, the technology allowed us to be able to call somebody, you know, halfway across the world within, you know, seconds and see their face. So I think that there's a bit of a double-edged sword there, but I think at the end of the day, everyone's still kind of craving that tribe or that group or that sense of belonging, because we've kind of lost sight of a lot of that through, you know, the last maybe 2 decades or so.
And I think that's why you will see people coming back together. And like, I'm sure you have communities of people that you want to hang out with. And I mean, I meet tons of people online because I kind of am in this online world like all of us. And then one of the greatest joys for me is for example, I was just in Arizona. So it's actually making the effort to meet someone I've connected with online who lives in Arizona and get together and meet them face to face and have a conversation. That's not just, I call them online silent conversations, when you're constantly typing, you know, little comments and putting emoticons and all that. But what happens when you meet people face to face? I do think there's a lot of people in the younger generation who have lost, or maybe they never had the ability to socialize. Their socialization has been around technology, and they're much more comfortable, like you said, texting a message rather than, oh my God, what happens when I have to meet someone face to face in person? And that, I think, is sad. Like, I think that's something that I would love to see becoming the new norm, where people want to get together. And I am seeing that to some degree with some of the movements that are happening in the younger generation. I mean, there's some that come to mind where large groups of people come together. And the reason they come together is because that's what, as human beings, we are about. We're about interaction, social interaction.
Definitely. I mean, that even at conferences, when I go to conferences, one of my big things I love to do is I love taking pictures with everybody, only because it's like this social proof that my internet friends are real and they're not just this made up thing that I email and talk to on Skype all day long. And so I think that we really crave making that connection again. And I know conferences for me are a huge way to do that. I'd love to shift gears real quick, only because you brought up some good stuff even before we jumped on the recording. And it was all about making the impossible possible. And so a quick little story that I always say is that I'll never forget being on a family vacation. We're on a boat, and we pull up to, we kind of see this cliff with a bunch of people diving off the cliff. And my dad turns to me and says, "I bet you won't do that." And before he could finish the sentence, I'd already jumped into the lake and started swimming over to this cliff. And you hear on the video camera from our family vacation many years ago, and he says, "Holy crap, he's actually going to do it." And so for me, I've always been one of those people where I don't really accept you telling me that it's impossible. I've just realized that I'm going to have to go about it a different way. So I'd love to hear your story of, turning impossible into possible. I know that, you've dealt with some medical things, but also, just personal experiences in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like all of us, we have our areas where we, if we were complete and whole all the time, I guess, not that we're not, but we all have our areas of minor insecurities or minor doubts, or I guess I had to in some ways take the lead when it came to my health. So that's my area that I have absolutely no doubt. When you just do something, you just know within you that, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. So it was tough when I was younger, because when you're really young, you depend on other people to make the choices for you, which is what happened when I was really sick when I was young, and my parents listened to the doctors. And of course, the doctors always had all the answers, right? They were the gods, in quotes. And I think it was through that experience when I was young that I learned to ask a lot of questions. So I'm one of these people who, I don't take everything at face value. I will ask a lot of questions, right? And somehow I seem to assimilate these things that maybe don't seem to fit together, but I come up with my own intuitive way of making choices for myself. So especially when it came to my health, believe me, it was grim. I didn't even have my family supporting me when I just said I flew off, I think I've said I flew off to Germany to a clinic there, because there was no other person here who even knew what to do with me. And even there, when they said, "This is impossible, you're never going to be able to travel again," it's just, what will you accept at face value? Who determines your life? At what point do you say, yeah, I might have some fears, and maybe this isn't, I don't know how it'll turn out, but if I don't do something or don't try something, like you're saying, jumping in the lake, if I don't try it, then I will never know what the experience is. So that's what I think my health issues have given me. I've always been like that. Also, when it comes, even writing my book, just somebody shares something with me, and if something resonates, I'll always go towards it. So it's sort of like the future's coming towards you, and then are you going to say yes to life, or are you going to go, oh yeah, no, I'm not that person. I can't do that. So my book, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I'm in a swimming pool in Sedona, and a woman's telling me she just came from this book writing retreat, and she'd never been to anything like it in her life. She's been writing for 25 years, and everybody who goes writes a book in 8 days. Well, my ears perked up, and I went, what? Everyone writes a book in 8 days? That sounds like my kind of experience.
Yeah.
And from the moment I heard it, it was like it spoke so loudly to me. Does that make sense to you? When something speaks so loudly to you that you can ignore it, but then you're doing yourself a disservice. So how do you just live your life and say yes, and just keep exploring it. What is it that resonates for you? I just met a bunch of people who are just fascinated with this idea of walking the El Camino. It had never occurred to me, but I went and met with them, and it was so fascinating because once it gripped them, once the idea came into them, they just couldn't not do it. So that's the double negative, but they had to figure out a way to do it. So that's really what I've done in my life. It's like when something resonates so strongly, even though all my resistances and the fears come up, because that's who we are as human beings. I mean, it's usually the fear that stops us from doing something, right? The what if and oh my God. So I've learned to say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? And it's usually not quite as bad as what you'll imagine, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've had that too. And it's, right now I want to go to Amsterdam, and yet I haven't gone to Amsterdam yet because I don't want to go there myself. So that's me being vulnerable here, saying there's a fear for me to travel overseas by myself, but yet I'll go to Arizona or to California or to anywhere like that by myself.
Yeah.
So it's getting to know yourself, like you said, wanting to get to know yourself to see, where do I stop myself? Because believe me, it isn't the outside world that stops us. It's us who somehow puts us a kibosh or, just says, no, I don't know if I could do that. And the thing I can only encourage people is really, if something resonates, just keep saying yes. And then I heard this thing, say yes until you have to say no. Because as long as you keep saying yes, you're exploring, right? Like you're taking what somebody would say is impossible for you and you're going, well, I don't know. It might be more possible than you think. And that has to do with any area of life. That's not only to do with health, which is my expertise, but it could be anything. Just stretch yourself. I mean, there's a great quote from Neil Donald Walsh, life begins outside your comfort zone. And that's really the truth, right? Because too many people, I believe, live within a very small comfort zone because it's easier to live within a comfort zone than to actually say, let me just take one little step outside and see how amazing my life could be.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask that. I was going to say, where is that balance in making sure that when you do say yes, that it's not just like, someone saying, hey, go jump into that fireplace, like
right.
Obviously that would be a no, but I think you answered that very well when you said, question yourself, what is the worst that could happen? And that's actually a big thing that I do. So when it came time for me to quit my job, which was one of the scariest things I had ever done, it really came down to, well, what's the worst that could happen? I had still lived at home at the time, so I had a roof over my head. It was very easy to say, well, the worst that could happen is I'm stuck at home with my parents for a little bit until I find something else. Mm-hmm. And then you realize it's really not all that bad. So I think that you brought up a very good point there as far as, determining the balance and knowing when to say yes and when to say no. And I've done a very similar thing with saying yes until I have to say no. I've said yes to quite a lot of things, and then you get to a point where you can feel the overwhelm settling in, and that's when you know that it's time to take a break for a little bit. But I think that that's not a permanent thing. I don't think that's a forever you have to say no. I think it's just hey, you need to calm down just a little bit. You're moving a little too quickly.
Well, it's also being discerning for yourself. And this is where the knowing yourself, what is it that's too much for you? Because we are all really different. So like what might work for you is very different than what might work for me. And it has nothing to do with age. That's the interesting thing. It has a little bit, but it also has to do with who you are as a person. So I love to regenerate. I call myself an in-outrovert. So I'm like an extroverted introvert. I love people, but my recharging is done by myself. Other people who are pure extroverts, they get charged up by being around a lot of people. So it's about this fine tuning and who you are and knowing yourself. That's really what it's about, because there's a lot of noise out in the world now, and there's a lot of opinions. And for everything you choose to do, you'd probably find 50% of the people who would give you all the negatives, and then 50% who would go, yeah, do it. And it's really, okay, but what is it that's really I want to do? And that's what I learned. So I honestly, with my health, there's so many things right now that I have no doubt about at all what choices I would make faced with even a very critical, diagnosis. So it is that. And I think that's what life's about. It's a big exploration, right? And it just keeps going. You don't actually reach a point where you go like, okay, well, that's it. Well, some people might, but it's this giant playing field in a way. It's like, what would you like to explore this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's constantly changing. You have things that suddenly you didn't even know were opportunities come at you and say, hey, you can actually do this or try this. It's crazy. For me, I never even saw writing a book as a possibility until much like your friend with the 8-day program. I had a coach kind of come up to me and said, hey, I've got a program that gets you totally published in 90 days. And that to me was very attractive. So I actually am finishing up my book here at the time of recording this.
Nice.
And it's called Life Rescripted. So I think that that's definitely up your alley too. It's all about looking at your life as if it were a story in a movie script and picking out the pieces that you want to rewrite.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of things too for people is not buying in so heavily to the story, because whatever happened in the past obviously influences us. But so many people really keep bringing those past, I don't know what they're kind of cellularly ingrained themselves, but it's like just really leaving that past behind and saying, today is the day that I want to create this. And I mean, we call it coming from this place of just nothing, where everything is possible. You live in this world of all possibilities. And it's such a different way of being in life than limiting yourself by everything that happened, by the what ifs this happens. So it's just a healthier way to be. And probably happier, right? I'm sure you'd say definitely happier way to live.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't think that any year has topped this year so far for me. And
nice.
I think that it's really the best way to go about things. So I'm a little scared for next year because who knows how much I'm actually going to accomplish if I keep that same mindset. But it's exciting at the same time. And as we're kind of rounding out the episode here, I didn't want to miss on the opportunity to ask you a little bit about the astrology. I wanted to jump back just a step.
Oh, sure.
And maybe just to round things off, just to hear a little bit about how astrology affects the times that we're in right now, the times that you were raised in, and maybe if it's something, for the audience and listeners to look into going forward, to maybe predict where some things might go for them.
Well, yeah, and I'm certainly not an astrologist, but I've always had this keen interest. Like, the first thing I go, okay, when were you born? Like, I have no idea what that meant to me, but somehow it meant something. Like, I knew something that I didn't know I knew. I'm sure you've had those experiences. But back in the 60s, what you had was this conjunction of Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and sudden change, Uranus and Pluto, which is really... Pluto is the planet of, and some people would talk about the underworld or very darkness but it's about institutions and when things are changing. So if you think of the 60s, things were pretty radical and were changing. You had the war. There's many things people can look up historically what was seeded. So Uranus and Pluto were conjunct. So during conjunctions, things are seeded, meaning new ideas, new seeds are planted, and then they grow. So then just recently, between 2012 and literally March of this year, we had 7 exact squares of Uranus and Pluto. So this is why we're seeing so many of the world events that are happening, also quite revolutionary, right? Like a lot of things, institutions in some ways crumbling. If you think of 2012 to 2015, all the things that have happened between the banking world, within the religious world and the political world. So all these huge institutions that we've grown to know and love and think are the be-all and end-all, things have been tumbling apart. Like things have been falling apart. So we're at this halfway mark. And I don't know too much, but they say the next 50 years is when we can actually bring to fruition all of these things that were seeded in the 60s. So this is why, for me, I see it's so much a part of our cultural conversation. None of what we're talking about is considered revolutionary. The question is, how do we get to the place where we live on a planet that's peaceful? And some people would say, again, I'm this rose-colored glass optimist, but why not? If more of us hold a possibility of peace and love as the values that we lead from, then it becomes more of a possibility in the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And creativity, so like all the entrepreneurial people and all the people who are doing creative work, what they've discovered is we're not only hardwired for language, we as human beings are hardwired for creativity. So nobody can say they're not creative, because in their own way, every single person is hardwired for creativity. So look at all the new things that have been born. I mean, the technology age in some ways is part of this Uranian revolution, right? Which is what's been going on. And so it has some amazing parts to it. But then we live polarities. I mean, there's I won't say good and bad. There's the light and there's the dark. There's the high and there's the low. So think of life. It's always about polarity. So we're seeing that in some ways, I guess, to extremes. That's the way I would describe it. So that's a little bit of what was going on, which was really fascinating to me because it was kind of right on target. So those who don't believe in astrology, if you really look at how it lined up, you'll see, wow, that was actually happening just as it was in some ways predicted. As above, so below. So as in the heavens, here on earth. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, it's neat to see how all these things line up. I know that, I didn't want to reveal too much of your story because I know you have an awesome book out that reveals a lot of that. So just to round things all off, maybe share with everyone what's the best place they can really listen to the story and learn about, the entertainment industry, the music industry, and some of your life experiences.
Yeah, I mean, my website has a lot of things, so my website is beverleygolden.com. You'll find me pretty much online. I write a lot. I'm published on the Huffington Post. I write about a lot of lifestyle topics and current things that people are talking about, like I said, and part of the cultural conversation. My book is available everywhere. So if you go to my website and you go to the book page, you'll be led to wherever you love buying the book, whether it's Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or whether you're in Australia or the UK, or it's available everywhere around the world. I'm in Canada, so it's at Chapters. So it's been really great because I think one of the things for me is to see it's not specific. Like when people said, who's your target market? It's like people. And I know that sounds so general, but people who really want to live, I guess, this value system. And that's what I'm finding. Like I said, I'll have people in their 20s who totally relate to all the stories, even though they're of a very different generation. And it's not only for boomers or people who grew up during the hippie era, although there's references, of course. It's not that kind of book. It's a book really about being human, having resistances and overcoming odds that people say you can't overcome, overcoming the impossible in the light of some dire situations, that you're faced with.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that this is going to resonate with quite a unique audience, which is cool. I know that a lot of our listeners are very into this type of thing. So once again, what's the best website for everyone to check that out?
So it's beverleygolden.com, and my first name is spelled with an L-E-Y. So Beverley, Beverley, Golden, Golden.com.
Perfect. Well, Beverley, this has been a great conversation. I know that we could go on and on about all sorts of things. And
indeed.
It's been a great talk so far. So I definitely look forward to staying in touch with you.
Okay, and happy travels. I can't wait to hear what the next few months and then what next year. I have a feeling next year is going to be pretty monumental for you. So enjoy it.
I'm definitely looking forward to it. A little scared, but very, very excited for everything
Keep going.
Ahead.
Keep saying yes.
Beverley, thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll talk again.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye for now.
This episode of The Year of Purpose is brought to you by our brand new book, Life Rescripted. Find your purpose and design your dream life before the curtains close. If you want to be the first in line to receive a free digital copy from me, all you have to do is head on over to www.liferescriptedbook.com to find out more. I've discovered what I think is the world's most effective process to design your path in life. It'd be a shame if I didn't share it. In Life Rescripted, you will discover the #1 strategy for determining your life purpose and how you can start a new path today, the 5X life hack rule for accomplishing your dreams and designing your life on your own terms 5 times faster, the ultimate solution for fear and how you can leverage it right now to make this year your best year yet, and so much more. Reserve your spot in line to get a free copy at www.liferescriptedbook.com, and I will see you in the next episode.